Hey, this is Moritz. In today's video, we're creating a paper stacking effect. This will be more of a beginner tutorial, meaning that you won't require any advanced Houdini or Vex knowledge for this one. Let's jump into Houdini. Let's dive into our paper object and create a curve node. The way we're going to make this work is basically create a dynamic group on which a certain force will apply, and everything outside of that group will slow down and stack and fold in and of itself. So let's create our paper shape. For this, we're creating a loop like that, but it doesn't close. Instead, we're going like that down there. So basically, we have an open loop with a very long tail on it, and this will become our paper. Now let's resample this to make it smooth, subdivision curves, and the length to 0.045. Let's create a sweep node and put it into ribbon mode. Increase the width to 1 and the columns to 22, and we obviously need to rotate that by 90 degrees. And basically that's our paper done. Let's name it and think about our collisions. These will be used to restrict the paper from folding, so it only folds where the loop is. So we're creating a carve node and carving out the loop part of our curve, like that. Then we're creating another sweep node. Put it into ribbon mode and increase the width to 2. Now we have to rotate it again by 90 degrees. And we're going to add a transform and ever so slightly move it to the right and a bit to the top, just like that. Now let's copy this node and basically do the opposite. So move it down and to the left. This will be our guide collision geometry, which will restrict the tail from folding. And with that, our geometry is set up. So now we can just dive into the Vellum solver. Let's put down a Vellum configure cloth node, put in our collision geometry. And as you can see, we basically, and I see that the collision geometry is intersecting with the loop. That's not what we want, so we're just moving down the part of the collision geometry so it doesn't intersect. Perfect. So with our collisions set up all correctly, we can jump into our Vellum constraint node and start with changing the density to 0.06 and the edge length to 0.26. Now let's increase the stretch stiffness because we don't want any stretching, and increase the bend stiffness to 6 and the damping ratio to 0.34. Also, we want to fix the beginning of our loop so it doesn't just fly off. And perfect. Now let's create a Vellum solver and adjust the values in here. Let's increase the substeps to 6, the constraints iteration to 240. Wait a minute. The smoothing iterations to 40 and the constraint iteration to 250. And set the velocity damping to 0.27. This will make the simulation a lot more stable. Also increase the static threshold and dynamic scale to 4, so the paper sticks better together, and disable external friction. Now the only thing left is to decrease the gravity to 1, and then we can jump into our solver. Create a pop group. And let's set it to bounding region, enable it, and adjust the size of the box to include everything except the loop. So perfect. Now everything is inside of the group except the top part of our paper. And that works perfectly. Let's call this apply force. And let's create the force. Set it to 1 and 0.9 to set the direction, and then scale it, in this case, by 12. Also check group and set the group to apply force, and now we can simulate it. All right, so technically it worked. I just don't like the fact that the top part of our paper just slopes downwards that quickly and that far. So let's jump back into our curve mode and adjust the slope so it's a bit more steep, so it doesn't fly off forward too much. Also, one thing that I forgot is to check the UVs on our sweep node. So now our paper also has UVs. Now we can resim it. And let's look at it. That looks good. Beautiful, it doesn't slope as much. That's nice. If you want to get a variety of results in different simulations, you can play with the velocity damping parameter in the solver or change the steepness of our curve. Now, let's add a subdivision surface to it and a normal node. We'll set this normal node to point because we'll need it later. And that's basically our paper simulation done. Now we can add a lapse thicken node, set that to 0.005 and check both directions. Now let's create our 3D text lines as you've seen in our example scene. For this we'll just quickly clean up a bit. So this will be our out sim node and add a clean node after our Vellum simulation and remove all unnecessary attributes and groups. But make sure to keep the UV attribute. The way we create these text lines is by selecting a few edges of our cloth geometry and then just polywiring them. We start with a group by range node and call this group horizontal lines because first of all we want to select only the horizontal lines, change the group type to vertices and select one of two. Let's put down a group promote node and promote this group from vertices to edges. And as you can see, we now only have the rows selected. You can switch this by the offset to the columns, and we'll use this group later on. For now, let's put down another group by range node, and this will be our lines selection. Keep everything as it is and just select 110 of 227. This is just the selection that I found to be pleasant. Add a group promote and promote it to edges. Make sure to tick include only elements as the boundaries and tick off include unshared edges. So these will be our lines. Now let's add a bit of randomness to it. Create a group node, call it lines, and select intersect with existing and check keep by random chance. Also obviously edge group. This way we can just add a bit of randomness to our lines. For our last group, we're going to create another group node. This will be our edges group, and we'll just instantly select edges and include by edge and unshed edges. So now we have the boundary. Now we add a group expand node and expand our edges by 2. This way we can just remove any lines that are too close to our edges. So let's combine all of them via group combine node, call the group lines, make it equal to the lines group, make it intersect with our horizontal selection. So we get rid of all vertical lines and subtract it by our edges group. This will basically be our margins on the left and the right side of the paper. You can increase or decrease it as you wish. And with that, we have an edge group that can now be converted to curves, which will be our 3D text. For this, we're going to use the lapse edge group to curve node and select our group. And we have our text curves. Now let's see them combined with our paper and we see nothing. The reason for this is because obviously they are at the same position, meaning that we do not really see the text. We can easily fix this by displacing our curves by the normals. For this we use a point VOP. Let's call it displace. And jump in, and it's a very quick setup. Just use the displace along normal node, wire in the position and the normals, wire out the position, and displace it by minus 0.008. And it's just a slight offset, but as you can see, We can now see our text. It's on top of our paper. Beautiful. Next up is to create a polywire node. Change the radius to 0.005 and increase the divisions to 12. Next, let's add a poly bevel node. Not that, poly bevel. And check ignore flat edges, put that threshold to 60 and increase the distance to 0.0086. Increase the divisions to 6. And as you can see, we need to recompute our normals. So let's do that quickly for both of our geos. And that's our setup done. Now let me quickly walk you through our render setup for this example scene. I've basically created a box with a cutout for our paper and then created a 3 light setup. One main key light coming from the left, one rim light coming from the back lighting up our box, and one accent light, which is just there to highlight the reflection of our glass and it's slightly tinted yellow. And that's the light setup. Let's just jump into the materials. They're very simple. Our floor material is a non-reflective medium gray diffuse material. And our text is very similar, a bit brighter and very rough reflection on it. The only a bit more complicated material is our paper material, at which I've combined 2 noises, one bigger Luca noise and one smaller Naki noise. Then I remapped them from 0.2 to 0.5 and added them to the roughness texture of my material. I made the material transmissive and added a bit of a golden color to the transmission color. And that's already it. It's quite the quick scene, quite the quick setup. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope you have fun playing around with this setup.